Hey everybody. So in today's video, I want to review some concepts in documentation and spend some time on quotations and plagiarism, which I didn't cover much in the last video. So I want to start by doing a little review exercise on documentation that will come up in just a moment. But this exercise, it's true-false. Okay, this exercise is also in your book, but there's a series of statements on documentation, and you're deciding if these statements are true or false. So if you want to take a moment and do the exercise, we'll start with the first 7. Then just pause the video and do that, and then I will go. So for number 1. Parenthetical citation in the text of a paper must always include a URL. Okay, that is not true. All right, because the key words there are parenthetical and in the text. So a works cited entry should always have a URL. All right, but a parenthetical citation that is in parentheses. All right, so it's a citation you might have at the end of a sentence in your essay. So that's not going to have the URL. Number 2, the works cited list is organized alphabetically by authors' last names or by title for a work with no author. That is true. Number 3, when in-text citations are used throughout a paper, there is no need for a works cited list at the end of the paper. That is false. Okay, you should always have both in-text citations and a works cited list. All right, you can't have one or the other. All right, when it says works cited, that means works that are cited in the essay. So if you don't have anything cited, then you shouldn't have a works cited page, and vice versa. So number 4, an in-text citation names the author if there is an author, either in a signal phrase introducing the cited material or in parentheses after the cited material. Okay, so that is true. All right, so if there's an author, then you need to give the author's last name. All right, either in the sentence or in parentheses at the end of the sentence. 5, when a work's author is unknown, the work is listed under anonymous in the list of works cited. That is false. Okay, so if you don't have an author's name, then you just begin the citation in the works cited with the title. All right, not ever with the word anonymous. Okay, number 6, all authors are listed last name first, followed by first name in the works cited list. This is kind of a trick one. Technically, it's false. Okay, I would say most authors are listed last name first, but there are cases where, like, let's say if you have 2 authors, okay, only the first author in that list is listed last name first, followed by first name. Okay, so the only author that's ever listed last name first name is always going to be only the author's name that's at the very beginning of the entry on the works cited list. Number 7, when a work has no page number, it is possible that nothing will appear in parentheses to mark the end of the citation. That is true. Okay, so if your source does not provide page numbers, then and you mention the author's last name in the sentence, then you don't need to have anything in parentheses at the end because that's your citation. All right, there's no other information that you need to give. All right, and then the last 3, 8, 9, and 10. So if you want to pause and read through the last 3. Okay, so number 8, in the parentheses marking the end of an in-text citation, the abbreviation P or double P is used before the page number. This is false. In-text citations do not abbreviate for P or double P. However, they do on the works cited list, right? So this is one of those rules where it's, you need to keep track of what's true for an in-text citation and what's true for the works cited list. All right, but an in-text citation, you just give the number. You don't abbreviate for page or pages. Okay. Number 9, when a paper cites 2 or more works by the same author, the in-text citation includes at least the author's last name and the title, or a short version of the title. Okay, and that's true. Yeah, so if you have 2 or more works by the same author, right, then you need to give the author's last name and the title, or if it's in parentheses, you can just give the first important word of the title. But otherwise, we don't know which source you're quoting if you just give the name. All right, and then number 10, for a works cited entry for a web source, a permalink, static permanent link, or DOI, digital object identifier, is preferable to a URL. This is true, but it's not something that I don't know, you necessarily need to worry too much about. You should be familiar with these terms, a permalink or a DOI. They come up sometimes when you're getting sources from a database. So, so when you're using the database and you're using the citation that's given to you on the database, it might end with a number as opposed to, say, a URL. And that's the DOI. And, and technically the DOI is better. Personally, I don't care. So, when you're actually giving me your works cited list, don't feel like you have to seek out the DOI. If you have the link, that's fine. So, so what I want to do now is take a look at quotations and then plagiarism, and some things that you should be familiar with before you take the documentation test, and also before you actually start, using quotations for your essay. Okay, so when you're giving a quotation in an essay, you always need to make sure you give context for the quotation. So, you need what is referred to as a signal phrase, okay, that lets us know, who is speaking, what, where this quotation is coming from, what they're talking about. All right. So, so when we talk about giving context, the purpose is to tell the reader everything they need to know to understand the quotation the first time they read it, right? So it doesn't feel like these words are coming out of the blue. And also to make sure that you're not taking the quotation out of context, right? I mean, it's easy to take, say, a sentence out of an essay and make it sound like it means whatever you want it to mean. And so, it could be that this sentence doesn't really apply to the situation you're writing about. So it's important that you're always setting up your quotations with context. The context should explain any or all of the following, who or what is being described in the quotation, who is speaking. I mean, that's a given. That's part of your citation, is letting us know where the quotation is coming from. But in some cases, the author is not the one speaking in the quotation, right? So if you're quoting, for example, something from the movie, like, you need to say, like, who actually is saying these words. What idea, event, or situation is the author responding to? So why is the person saying this? If the person is speaking or responding to somebody else, that should be clear in the context before we get to the quotation. And then anything that's ambiguous that are contained in the quotation, especially pronouns. So, like, if your quotation, begins with the pronoun he, that it should be clear in the lead up to the quotation what the he is referring to, right? So you don't want to explain context after the quotation, because that just forces us to go back and reread the quotation now that we understand what they're talking about. Um, so, and when appropriate, when you're giving the context, use the last name of the author as the subject if it's a situation where the author is actually writing the essay or giving you a position. So don't say like the essay proposes or this essay claims. Say Jones proposes if Jones is the author. All right. Now, when it comes to introducing quotations, okay, there are two main ways to introduce a quotation formally in an essay. Okay. The first one is with a complete thought and a colon. So if you remember our rules for colons, we're only going to use a colon if everything before the colon is an independent clause. In other words, it could stand on its own as a sentence. All right. So in this example, however, studies show that an inability to save money results from not predicting future outcomes. All right. So that could be a sentence on its own. It's an independent clause, though I realize I left out the word "and" before inability. But it's an independent clause. So this would be a case where we have a complete thought, a complete sentence before the quotation, introducing it. So we have a colon. All right. You can also introduce a quotation with an incomplete thought. But in this case, you need to separate the introduction of the quotation with a comma. So typically, you have the author's name and a verb, right? So Begley and Chatsky claim, comma, quotation. All right. And try to use verbs that are more meaningful than just saying somebody says or somebody writes. Okay. And so I have a list of some of the verbs you can use. These are what I call rhetorically accurate verbs. So if you say that they assert or argues, believes, claims, demonstrates, declares, these words are much more descriptive than just saying somebody says or writes, because they also include some of the intention behind the quotation. Okay. Do not begin a quotation after a period or a semicolon, though, when you're presenting a quotation in a formal essay. All right. And you always need a citation with the quotation. If there's page numbers, you always need the page numbers. And again, if there is a page number, that's always at the end. It's always in parentheses. Okay. So a few other tricks when you're introducing quotations like this. So you may take words out of the middle of the quotation by adding ellipses. All right. So this is a case where we're introducing it with a complete thought, a colon. Golden demonstrates that parts of Southern California are especially suited to the use of wind power, colon. And then, we've shortened the quotation. We've taken something out of the middle because, let's say it's a long sentence, so we don't need all that detail. And the sentence still makes sense if we take that part out. Half of California's turbines are located in Altamont Pass. Okay, end quote, citation. I should also point out something with the citations. Period is always after the citation. So if you're ending with your quotation, it's quotation mark, citation period. There's no period before the quotation mark if there's a citation. All right. Now, if you don't have a parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence, the period does come before the quotation mark, never after. Okay. But getting back to ellipses, and when do we use ellipses? So again, we're using ellipses because we're taking something out of the quotation. All right. We typically don't need to use ellipses at the beginning or end of a quotation. All right. But there are a couple of cases where we would. So only use ellipses at the beginning of a quotation if you're introducing the quotation with a comma or a colon, and if the first word is capitalized but not the beginning of the sentence. All right. So to give you an example, okay, Golden comments on one when in particular, complete thought, colon, quotation. So the first word, Tehachapi Pass, is capitalized, all right, because it's a proper noun. So we can't tell based on the capitalization of that first word whether it's the beginning of the sentence. Okay. Um, Whereas, to go back one, um, in this previous one, well, this is the beginning of the sentence because I can tell that it is capitalized. If it were not capitalized, then I would know that it's not the beginning of the sentence. So those ellipses at the beginning are there to let us know that this is not the beginning of the sentence because we can't tell by the capitalization. All right. So if I can tell by the capitalization of the first word of the quotation that it is or is not the beginning of the sentence, I do not need ellipses. But if I'm beginning with a proper noun and it's not the beginning of the sentence, that's when we have ellipses at the beginning. It's a little complicated. Ellipses at the end, we're only going to use ellipses at the end if the quotation marks the end of your sentence, but not the end of the sentence in the original. All right. So, and again, we're only doing this if we're introducing the quotation with a colon or a comma. Okay. So in this case, the sentence continues after megawatts, but it's the end of my sentence. So I'm going to put ellipses at the end. All right. Just to show that the sentence continues. All right. Now, that's introducing quotations. All right. So we can introduce a quotation with a colon or a comma. All right, depending on what's before. The other way we could present a quotation in a sentence is to integrate it. All right. So I'm distinguishing between two ways of presenting. We're introducing a colon or comma and integrating it. All right. And when we're integrating the quotation, what we're typically doing is taking just a small part of the quotation, and we're working it grammatically into our sentence. So the difference is that there's not a clear break between the part of the sentence that's introducing the quotation and the quotation itself. All right, so we don't have an introduction colon quotation or introduction comma quotation. The quotation just is sort of jammed into the sentence, and grammatically it flows into it. So we don't need any punctuation, right? So if I say, in this case, Begley and Chatsky show that an inability to save money is not a sign of unintelligence, but a failure to accurately see the consequences of not saving, that's an integrated quotation, all right? One way you can tell that it's an integrated quotation, if I read the quotation aloud, you can't necessarily tell when the quotation begins, all right? Whereas in the other examples, you can tell because there's clearly a break between the first part of the sentence and the quotation, all right? But in this case, there's not. So the rules are a little bit different when we're integrating a quotation like this. We're not introducing it, but it's flowing grammatically into the quotation without any punctuation. Okay. So one of the things you have to do is make sure that your quotation grammatically matches the rest of the sentence. Now, you don't really have to do this with a quotation that you're introducing. So if there's a colon or comma before the quotation, and there's a clear break between the introduction and the quotation, you don't have to worry about whether it grammatically matches. But if you are integrating it, you do. All right. So the things you typically have to look out for are pronouns and verbs. Okay. So in this case, the original quotation, said the wind accounts for up to 8% of our electrical load. All right. But if I'm integrating it like this, without a clear break between the sentence and the quotation, I need to change those because the verb tense doesn't make sense anymore because it's after 2008. And then our doesn't make sense because we can't assume that our readers are Californians. All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the verb tense. I'm going to add an ed to the end, and I'm going to change our to its. And you can make those changes as long as you put the change in brackets. As long as you put brackets around what you added or what you changed, then you can do that. All right, the brackets signal to the reader that, hey, I changed something to make it grammatically fit my sentence. All right, and of course you only do this, you don't want to put brackets around something and change the meaning of it. So you want to be careful about using brackets, but verb tenses, pronouns, and capitalization, those are really the main situations where you might need to include brackets. One thing you might have to do, for example, sometimes, you might replace a pronoun with the noun, right? So if I didn't begin when discussing California, I might need to say of bracket California's electrical load. All right. Now, when it comes to capitalization, okay, so you may need to change capitalization to match the grammar of the sentence when you're integrating the quotation. And again, you have to keep straight here the difference between introducing the quotation and integrating it. Because when we're introducing it with a comma or a colon, it doesn't matter if the first word is capitalized or not capitalized. It should just be whatever it is, in the original. But if we're integrating it, then the grammar and the capitalization do have to match. So if we're integrating a quotation that begins with a capital letter, then, and it's not a proper noun, then we need to make it a lowercase letter and put brackets around the lowercase letter to signal to the reader that we changed this to make it match the grammar of our sentence. The wind power accounts for more than 1% of California's electricity. The contribution goes even higher during breezy early mornings in summer. Okay. So again, reading that out loud, you can't tell when the quotation begins and ends. So we're not introducing it, so we need to change that capitalization with a bracket. All right. So typically, you do not need to worry about brackets when you're introducing a quotation with a comma or a colon, but you may need to use brackets when you are integrating the quotation. Okay. I'm going to skip over this. This is going to, I'll post a PowerPoint slide if you want to take a look at these and try to figure them out. They're just, correcting errors in how, correcting errors in using quotations. Okay. And if you have a question about them, you can email me and I'll tell you what the answers are. But I want to move up, for the sake of time, for your time, I want to move ahead to plagiarism and talk about plagiarism and paraphrase. All right. So there are two primary ways that you can plagiarize a source. And this is something that will be on the documentation test. And obviously it's important for your exemplification essay. Two primary ways that you can plagiarize. One is you're giving information from the source without giving credit. All right. So you took some information, you put it in your essay, you didn't say where you got the information from. This is not necessary with common knowledge, or what is known as common knowledge. Common knowledge it's kind of a tricky concept. I mean, basically general historical, biographical, summary, procedural information, the fact that, like the days are 24 hours, or that George Washington was the first president. Just just really general information that does not require extensive research into a topic is considered common knowledge. All right. A couple of rules of thumb with common knowledge. One, if you're not sure whether this is common knowledge, then just give a citation for it. All right. You're better off giving a citation when it's unnecessary than needing a citation when it's necessary. The other rule of thumb is that if it takes more than a sentence to present the information, then just cite it, right? So if you feel like, well, this is common knowledge, but it's taking up half my paragraph, okay, then that's something you need to cite, right? Common knowledge would be, something that's like one sentence long that's not really adding, not adding much to your essay, but it's maybe helping you with your analysis or your, or your introduction of a topic. Okay. The second way to plagiarize a source, all right, is you've got a citation, all right, um, but you're giving the information using the same or similar wording that was in the original source, but without quotation marks. All right, so you're presenting these words. So in the first case, we're plagiarizing the information. In the second case, we're plagiarizing the writing. Right, you're presenting this as your writing when you're actually copying somebody else's writing. Okay, so and there's a few ways that you might plagiarize, even if you think that you're not plagiarizing. For example, if you take a sentence and you rearrange the words without changing them significantly, that's still plagiarism. All right, so even it doesn't have to read exactly the same for it to be plagiarism. Replacing words with synonyms but keeping the same sentence structure is still plagiarism. Right, so if I just take a sentence and I use my thesaurus function on my computer and just replace 4 or 5 of the words, still plagiarism. All right, because again, you didn't write that sentence. Okay, all you did was replace words. So rearranging and replacing is not writing. Okay, you're not expressing that idea in your own unique way. All right, so like for example, if I said to exist or not to exist, that is the riddle. Okay. I'm clearly copying the famous Shakespeare quote, to be or not to be, that is the question. All right. I've just replaced some of the words. Some of my replacements might even be questionable, but I'm still copying a sentence, right? It's, like I come up with a new way to explain the idea. All right. I'm just replacing words. So that's still considered plagiarism. All right. A couple of rules of thumb, and I know that this, in Blackboard, the last one is cut off, but I'll explain it. And then, again, I'm going to make the PowerPoint available to you. So, one, don't copy 3 consecutive words from a source without giving quotation marks. All right. So it's not that you necessarily every single time there's a word that's also used in your source, you have to give a quotation mark. And if it's a kind of a generic word, if your source uses the word person and you use the word person, you don't necessarily have to put that in quotation marks. But if you have 3 or more consecutive words that are the exact same, presented in the exact same order as the source, put that in quotation marks. All right. And don't copy words that are distinctive or unusual or express an opinion without using quotation marks. All right. So even if it's, say, like a kind of a generic word like exciting, right? If somebody says that, that the new, I don't know, that the new action movie is exciting, right? And you're expressing that opinion, you would actually, even if it's just one word that you're quoting, exciting, you would want to put that one word in quotation marks because it's expressing an opinion, right? That's where it gets really tricky. So it's not necessarily, it's not a generic word anymore, even though it's a common word, because it's really expressing a point that the writer is trying to make. Or if the writer is describing something in an unusual way, using a word that people wouldn't ordinarily use to describe something, then you want to put that quotation marks, even if it's under 3 words. All right. So let's look at a couple of actually, before we look at a couple of examples, let's talk about paraphrasing. Right. So how do you approach actually paraphrasing something? Right. If you can't just rearrange the words, if you can't just replace the words, how do you actually take an idea and put it into your own words? It's a difficult concept to explain, but this is how I think about it and how I encourage you to think about it. Imagine someone does not understand the original text and you're trying to explain it to them. So imagine somebody read the exact same thing you read, and then they came to you and said, I don't know what this person's talking about at all. Can you explain this to me? You would not in that case just take the sentence sentence and rearrange the words, or find a thesaurus and replace the words with probably more complicated words or words that are less familiar. Um, what you would do is you come up with another way of explaining the information. You'd approach it from a different angle. So that's being able to do that really means that you understand the concepts, right? But if you think about it that way, if you think about, you're trying to explain this to somebody who maybe wouldn't understand the original or would have a difficult time understanding the original, that often frees you up to figure out a new, unique way of explaining this. A couple of characteristics of effective paraphrase. Effective paraphrase is typically easier to understand than the original. All right, it gets to the point. So a lot of times the original sentence is, maybe a little more technical, a little more descriptive, maybe a little more convoluted, right? When you're trying to do a paraphrase, you're trying to get to the point. Okay, well, what's the main point here? Like, if we strip away everything else, like, what are they trying to get? What is the author trying to get at here? Okay. Effective paraphrases typically, they're not always, but it's typically shorter than the original, right? And when I say not always, there are times, like, for example, if I wanted to give a paraphrase of a really short quotation, like, to be or not to be, that is a question. Especially something that's where the meaning is a little ambiguous. In that case, the paraphrase might be longer than the original because it's it's a short quotation trying to express an ambiguous and complicated idea. But usually, right, when you're not giving more or less an interpretation of the quotation, like, usually your paraphrase is going to be shorter than the original, right? Because again, you're getting to the point. You're stripping away the extra descriptiveness or the fancy writing, so it's probably going to be shorter. So if your paraphrase is the same length or longer, if you think it would be harder to understand than the original, then you're probably not paraphrasing correctly. You're possibly plagiarizing. So keep that in mind. When you're paraphrasing, describing the your source, explaining your source. So I want to look at a couple of examples of paraphrase and plagiarism. Okay, so in this case, I have the original, and then two examples of incorrect paraphrase. All right, so these are attempts to paraphrase the original, but they both contain plagiarism. Right, so the original reads, apart from the fact that music accounts for much of the power of Hindi movies, creating a heightened mood that dialogue can rarely achieve, film song spreads out from cinema to permeate many other areas of Indian society. So in the first case, in India, film music creates a heightened mood that accounts for a great deal of the power of Hindi movies, writes Nazreen Muni Kabir. All right, so we've got, we have a citation here. Though if you're going to end with writes Nazreen Muni Kabir, you might as well just put Kabir in parentheses. That's the citation's a little awkward. But the problem with this is if you look at it, you've got a few phrases that are essentially the same. All right. So in India, film music creates a heightened mood. All right. So heightened mood, we're using the exact same words there. And again, you might say, well, it's two words. You said three or more. But this is a case where you're expressing the opinion or position of the author, and also using words that are, I think, distinctive. Heightened mood is not an unusual phrase, but it's also not a common phrase. And so, So if you're going to say, if they say that something creates a heightened mood, and you're going to say that it also creates a heightened mood, then you should put that in quotation marks. I would also point out that even though creating and creates uses a different verb form, it's still the same verb, right? So it's still the same word. So, just changing the tense on a word does not change the word, right? So really it's, we have 4 consecutive words that are exactly the same. Okay. And I think it also accounts for a great deal of the power of Hindi movies. This says that music accounts for much of the power of Hindi movies. All right. So essentially, we've made a couple of changes, but we've mainly just rearranged the original. All right. So that's plagiarism. Okay. So that needs to be rewritten, or we need to add some quotations there. The second example, Nareen Mooney Kabir argues that the film songs disseminate from the movies to pervade several other aspects of Indian life. Okay, so this would be an example of the thesaurus approach, where I'm just going to replace words in the original to try to make it seem like I rewrote it. So film songs, so the original says the film song spreads out from cinema. So we replace spreads out from cinema with disseminate from the movies. Okay, disseminate means to spread information. To permeate many other areas of Indian society comes to pervade several other aspects of Indian life. Okay, so we've replaced a lot of words, all right, but we've kept basically the same sentence structure, all right, or at least the same structure for that last part of the sentence, and that's still plagiarism, all right. And I also point out that in this case, the original makes more sense. The paraphrase is a little awkward because you're replacing words, and sometimes when you replace words, you mess up the flow of the sentence. Sometimes the words you choose are not the best words for that context. So you always want to be really careful about just going to a thesaurus to find a new word. But in this case, we've clearly kept the same structure. We haven't found a new way to express the idea. We've just replaced a variety of words. Okay, so replacing words is not the same as writing. Okay, so let's look at some examples of more effective paraphrase. So in this case, the original says, even before the advent of cheap audio cassettes, days when record players were rare and expensive, film songs achieved far-reaching popularity through street singers and wedding bands, which often played film hits rather than folk or traditional tunes. Okay. So in this paraphrase, Nazreen Kabir notes that the songs in Hindi movies became widely popular even when few Indians owned recordings. All right. So first of all, notice how much shorter and how much more direct our paraphrase is than the original. All right. Because that's what paraphrase should try to do. It should try to be more direct. It should try to get to the point. All right. So Kabir is a professional writer. She's developed a certain style, and is aiming for a certain level of descriptiveness that we don't need in our paraphrase. All right. We're getting to the point, and the point is simply that the songs became widely popular. Okay, even though not many people owned recordings. So like this part here at the beginning, even before the advent of cheap audio cassettes, in the days when record players were rare and expensive, right? What's the point of that? Not many Indians own recordings. That's the point, right? So we're cutting to the chase here. Now you might point out widely popular, very similar to far-reaching popularity. Okay, but because even though we've replaced far-reaching widely, we're not keeping the exact same structure to the sentence as before. So like that's a change that's fine. Yes, we've replaced some words here, but we're not just replacing words. If you're rewriting an idea, some word replacement is, and that, of course, that's going to happen. But that's not all we're doing, right? We're trying to find a new way to express the idea. All right, and then one more. And the songs, with their inventive Hindi Urdu lyrics, often written by celebrated poets, have long been a bonding force in the Indian diaspora, recreating a familiar world of images and emotions and linking millions of people to their homeland. So paraphrase, Nazrin Muni Kabir points out that Hindi film songs attract a worldwide audience of Indians who use them to reconnect to their roots and their community. Okay, so again, notice how much more direct the paraphrase is than the original, how it's easier to understand, how we might use, there are a few words that are the same, there's a few words that we've replaced, but by and large, we've found a new, more direct way to express the idea. Okay, and that's what you're trying to do with paraphrase, right? You're trying to get to the point, okay, but you're trying to do so without just rearranging or replacing words. All right, so that's it for today's video. So again, make sure before you do the documentation test that you you review the rules for in-text citations, works cited entries, the quotation and plagiarism information that I went over in this video. I would go through the reading and I look at the exercises in your student companion. All right, and those are really the best practice. Okay, even the exercises that we haven't done that are related to using quotations and using citations. All right, you haven't figured it out yet. The answers, I believe, are in the back of your book. So use those exercises, and they actually explain the answers in the back of the book too. So use those exercises, as an opportunity to practice, and then check your answers with the back of the book. If you have a question about any exercises, whether they were assigned or not, then send me an email. I'd be happy to help you out with it. Okay. But, don't wait until the weekend, though, to take the documentation test. That's the last thing that I say. I know I said this before in the announcement. I said, don't wait until the end of the week, or don't wait until the weekend. All right. Try to get it done before the weekend. Preferably, I think Wednesday or Thursday would be a good day for it. I know this video's just getting out on Tuesday, but you want to make sure you have time to also do the rough draft. But try to get the documentation test done so that way, if for some reason you're having technical issues with Honor Lock or with the tests, then we've got time to try to fix them. All right. But if you're taking the test at 11 o'clock Sunday night and everything stops working, your power goes out, your computer dies, whatever. But at that point, you're kind of stuck, all right? Because I'm not supposed to, I'm not supposed to allow you late work for technical issues, right? You should be trying to get the work done before the very, very last minute. Okay. All right. So that said, have a great rest of your day, and don't forget to take the documentation test and complete your rough draft by Sunday at 11:59 p.m. All right. Thank you.